Okay. The content of this presentation is proprietary and confidential information of the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative. It is not intended to be distributed by any party without the written consent of the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative. Attendees should note that the educational component of this session is being recorded and will be published on our website and YouTube page. To maintain complete confidentiality, an announcement will be made before recording begins, and only the presenter will be identified during the recording. Therefore, to ensure complete anonymity, all attendees are asked to mute their microphones now until an announcement is made that the recording is complete. Presentations are intended for educational purposes only and do not replace the independent professional judgment. The ideas expressed in this presentation are the professional opinion of the presenter and do not necessarily represent those of the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative or its constituents. Before acting on any of the information presented, attendees should consider the appropriateness of the information as it pertains to their individual situation and seek independent professional advice should any concerns arise. If you or someone you know are in what is believed or perceived to be a situation that is or may become harmful, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline via phone at 1-800-799-SAFE, that's 1-800-799-7233, or visit their website at thehotline.org, or as always, you can dial 911 in the event of an emergency. That said, this evening we are so grateful you are all with us, and we thank you, Dr. Lisa Saponaro, for making the time to discuss surviving the summer of COVID, strengthening family bonds, and cultivating healthy communication. It's all yours.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. As she mentioned, I'm Dr. Lisa Saponaro. I'm a licensed psychologist with a practice in plantation. And we're going to talk about how to survive the summer. And just briefly, I want to touch on signs of distress. And this is really, sometimes we recognize in our role as first responders, signs of distress in others, but we forget to look at signs of distress in our kids, our family, our parents, and ourselves. And so as time has gone on in this summer time of COVID, the signs of distress are starting to increase. And some of those are fear, anxiety, worry and panic, boredom, depression, sadness and apathy, anger, irritability, frustration. All of those negative mood sets are signs that we're not doing well and a signal that we need to tune into taking care of ourselves. Some of the behavioral changes that signify distress are changes in our sleep pattern, inability to sleep, nightmares, vivid dreams, changes in our eating patterns, overeating, losing our appetite. Other feelings are lonely and isolated. Some physical symptoms of distress include nausea, diarrhea, tightness in our chest, difficulty breathing, difficulty thinking, and right now, again, in time of COVID, some of those physical symptoms can mask themselves like COVID, and that can hijack our brain and make us even more distressed because what we previously could identify as anxiety now becomes anxiety to the extreme. There's a lot of stigma and hard feelings and polarization surrounding this. Avoidance, another sign of distress. And we mentioned as we're communicating more and more in teleplatforms, avoiding some of those interpersonal interactions, avoiding hugs out of fear and human contact. And so a lot of those are some of our signs of distress. Other behavioral ones include increased use of alcohol, tobacco, and other substances. And there is nothing positive that's going to come from increasing those products. And so paying attention to that, not only and first and foremost in ourselves, but in the house around us, alerts us to who needs our extra attention and care. In terms of, it's a little out of order, what makes a good relationship? A key component to a good relationship is that we see our partner as accepting of ourselves, as concerned with our well-being, as understanding and supportive. So in other words, my partner responds to my needs. And when we're stressed from external sources, and at this point, everybody is stressed from external sources, and particularly you on the front lines have additional layers of stress, it makes it more difficult to respond to our partner's needs. And this is true for all the players in relationships right now. And when we're stressed out, we tend to communicate in ways that are critical, argumentative, and blaming. And that type of conversation leads to resentments and brews anger and just exacerbates our stress level. So partners have more trouble listening to one another and taking one another's perspective. And it in turn is leading to lower satisfaction and emotional distancing from partners. And that's really tough when most of the time we're spending is with our partner and not getting those other social interactions. If there's not good communication, if we don't perceive that person under our roof to understand our needs and care for our well-being, then we start to avoid the limited human contacts that we do have. And again, our stress is exacerbated. So the key to having a successful relationship is communicating in ways that enhance the relationship and that convey our support and understanding of one another. The components of a successful relationship start with healthy communication. And healthy communication requires that we have compassion for our partner's perspective. That means that we take the time to listen to what they're saying to us and understand their point of view with empathy. And when we understand our partner's points of view and have empathy for their perspective, it allows us to figure out where we can compromise from our own point of view. And in doing so, that reinforces our commitments in the relationship. And so I like to think of those 4 C's as the ingredients in a successful relationship. So how do we communicate effectively? Because people will say, like, I am talking clearly. I do not understand what he does not understand what I'm saying right now. And a lot of times it's considering what's going on in the person we're talking to's life. Where are we? Is this the appropriate situation time for the conversation we're having? And we forget that our nonverbals carry more weight than our verbals. In fact, 98% of a message is carried in our nonverbals, with our facial expressions and our tone conveying our mood to our listener. And so many people think that communication is about the words that we use, and it is about so much more than the words we use. It is about how we're carrying ourselves, the attitude that we're bringing into the conversation. Communication includes how close or how far we stand from one another. If you really want to have a close conversation, you're going to face your partner. You're going to be in touching distance from one another. And in fact, touching and having physical contact during the conversation increases the level of connection and intimacy. You're going to make eye contact. Your facial expressions are going to reflect sincerity. You're going to look relaxed and have an open posture. You're going to give your partner or whomever you're talking to your full attention. And all of those things matter so much in our communication. Again, so much more than the words we're going to choose. Think about how you feel when you're trying to have a serious conversation with somebody and they're on their cell phone. You don't have their attention. Or when they have a bad attitude. Think of how good a listener you are when other things are occupying your mind. And so if you want to have a good conversation, clearing your mind, examining your nonverbals, and getting yourself set as an individual is going to be an important process before you engage with your partner. I think to most first responders, authenticity is essential, and to all good communication, authenticity is essential. And we know when people are being real with us and it helps us build trust and allows us to go further and deeper in our communication with our partners. In order to do that, we really need to actively listen. And it's probably more important, again, than words. And in order to actively listen, that means we're not talking, we're not trying to prove our point of view, we're not waiting to combat what they're saying or to defend what they're saying. We're just trying to take their perspective. And again, that's part of developing the compassion part in communication through that active listening. And if you want to find out if you're on track, paraphrase. See if you really do understand what your partner's saying before you offer your own point of view. When you're going to offer your point of view, speak in I statements. People are much less defensive when you say, I really feel upset when I'm trying to have a conversation with you and you're on your cell phone. It's so much more pleasant than hearing, you're always on your cell phone whenever I try and talk to you, which puts the person on the defense. First, it uses that always language, but it's a you statement rather than an I statement. And when we make I statements, they're a lot harder to argue with because we're speaking only for ourselves. When you're engaged in a real conversation, take time to limit how much you have to say. So at the end of this, we're going to have a real conversation. Right now, this is a lot of me talking, but this is not what a conversation looks like. This is what a lesson or a lecture looks like. And when you want to have communication with your partner, it should not be like a lecture. All of us remember being children and hearing a parent or a teacher lecture to us and not liking it. And I'm sure somebody out there has a superior who's engaged them in a lecture rather than a conversation. And conversation is the type of communication we want to have. And that means we take turns. It goes back and forth. And when it's a back and forth situation, it's like tennis. You don't keep the ball. You allow input from both sides. When it's your turn, respond constructively. That means in a kind way that furthers the conversation and doesn't attack or criticize the other person. Doesn't call names, doesn't display power, doesn't make threats, and avoids interruptions. And in general, those are good strategies for communication. I mentioned the next part was compassion. And in compassion is being an active listener. It's being really present. It's giving hugs. It's being flexible, which leads to compromise. It's being kind, respectful, patient, and showing gratitude. It's engaging in your own self-care. And how does engaging in self-care mean compassion? I'm going to talk a little bit more about self-care in a bit, but in order to have care for others, we really need to demonstrate it for ourselves first. And it is the foundation of our wellness, is in our individual health. So through actively listening and understanding our partner's perspective, we're able to learn how to compromise. I think living in a house with people every day, one of the things that helps make that successful is just talking over schedules every day and getting on the same logistical time. In order to be present and have communication and compassion for one another, we need to make time for one another. And that needs conversation about how to do that, where it fits in each other's day. It also includes planning time away from one another. And that's a critical component of self-care. Plan time to exercise apart from your partner. Plan time to connect with your peers without your partner. Be flexible about how you get together, when you get together, what's most important. Respect one another's space. Again, being in the house with one another and not having the normal level of out and about that we typically would, people can feel like they're under one another's skin. And so particularly if a partner's working from home, have conversations about how to be respectful of that, setting up times maybe for lunch together and then respecting the work time as it resumes. Video calls. This is so common when people are working at home and the partners don't realize, and it's really respectful to let your partner know that you're going to be on a video call so that they're not inappropriately drifting by in the background. Taking turns with one another is part of compromise. That includes, what show are we going to watch? What are we going to order for dinner? Taking turns is part of compromise. Doing your part. Examine in the relationship, what's going on in this house? What am I doing? What's my partner doing? And this is not keeping tabs, but looking at yourself and figuring out what you can do to add more. Then the fourth C is commitment. And commitment is an ongoing process. Commitment happens every single day. It's the ongoing work on relationships. And in order to be committed, you have to be prioritizing your wellness. You have to get enough sleep. Again, this is part of your self-care, getting enough sleep. And this is particularly true for all of you in first responding, where you're working in shifts. It may be better for your family for you to get a nap or explain that you need your sleep after a long shift without enough rest in order to really be present to your family and be mindful with them. Commitment to your wellness routine, your activity, your health. That means engaging in regular exercise, having normal routines in your life, trying to eat and sleep in roughly the same times, nourishing your body in a healthy way. Committing to private time and intimacy with your partner. Committing to a date night and fun times. Making a family contract beyond just the partnership, but including your children in the commitment. What are people's roles and their responsibilities in the house? What do we do to reinforce those things? If your kids have chores, commit to paying their allowance. Follow through on it. Do things that you really enjoy. This can be family game nights, getting out and going for a hike, being outdoors, putting fun in your life. I want to go back and spend more time on self-care, because I think that that is really the most important part of being a good partner. And self-care, I mentioned sleep, I mentioned activity, and I mentioned your nourishment. And those are the physical components to self-care, but self-care is also part of your mental health. And that's my area of expertise in self-care. And that's how we talk to ourselves. That's having compassion for ourselves. That's giving yourselves an outlet to reach out to your health and safety groups, to process difficult times, to reach out to friends for support. That's not beating yourself up. That's accepting your mistakes. That's working on forgiveness. And from a mental health perspective, engaging in that positive mindset keeps us connected to our strengths and allows us to be more resilient in our lives. And so from a physical perspective, get your sleep, eat right, and get your exercise. And from a mental health perspective, there's a wonderful free course right now from Yale that's being offered called The Science of Wellbeing. And I recommend everybody get involved in the practices of well-being, because they keep our minds in the game and healthy. In terms of mindset management, keeping things in perspective, this is 1 summer of our lives. This is 1 hour of the shift. This is 1 coworker I'm struggling with. This is 1 gigantic mess in the living room that will get cleaned. Just putting it in perspective is part of keeping a healthy mindset. In order to think clearly, you do have to have enough rest. Your brain does not think through things, and it does not come up with solutions effectively if you're not well rested, well exercised. Limit the time you spend watching TV, limit the time you spend watching social media, limit the time you spend engaged in electronics. It is a mental vacation, but not a healthy one. And so limiting that helps keep a positive mindset. And we are, there's so much research out there that excess consumption of social media leads towards increased anxiety and depression. So we know it erodes our mindset. It's people posting happy things, vacations, and or angry things, and it plays on our emotions. If you're having a stressful day, focus on things that you have control over. Engage in something that you have mastery of. If you like woodworking, do woodworking. If you are great at cards, play cards. But something that you really can do that, and it makes you feel more in control. Engage in a power pose. Spread yourself out. Stretch your arms out. Take 3 deep breaths. Practice compassion with not only yourselves, but others. Engage in gratitude. Gratitude is recognizing very specifically those things we're thankful for. Being in the present moment and being grateful for your heart beating in your chest, for your breath, for your life, and for your health. And right now, this is truly a time to appreciate those things. Being grateful and staying connected to your support systems. Our support systems are critical in our mental health. And we've talked about an uptick in suicide. People are angry, frustrated, irritable, bored, and we need to connect to our support system, get our hugs, and stay close to the people we love. Do fun things, run around, do things you enjoy. There's some wonderful meditation apps out there. COVID Coach is by the Veterans Administration and is free. Headspace and Calm are also out there. There's one called Alarm Clock that wakes you up to meditations. Having a flexible mind and being open to new ideas rather than being rigid and inflexible allows us to have better mindsets. In every aspect of life, taking a deep breath helps us get a reset, brings oxygen to our brain, helps us think more clearly, slows our heart down, gives us everything we need. It's the cornerstone to all mindfulness. Mindfulness and acceptance are part of having a positive mindset. If you want to have control of your mind, limit the use of intoxicants. Take breaks in your day. Pray, read, listen to music, jump rope, take a bath, do a puzzle, blow bubbles, skip, play hopscotch, get fresh air, explore the outdoors, pet your dog, unplug and unwind. All of those play a role in having a positive mindset. And so with that, I'd love to open it up to questions and comments and hear what's important to all of you.
Well, thank you for all of that information, Dr. Lisa Saponaro. And we do have some wonderful questions that are coming in. I'm going to ask you one that seems to come up all the time. Especially because a lot of first responders are going to work and coming home to their families that are either working from home or are not working at the time. And we often come home to our loved ones, spouses or whatever it is that have a honey-do list for us. And we just got off, even if it's not a stressful shift per the definition, it really is rather stressful because we never know during times of a pandemic, like you're living in that high stress period. Like, what if the next call is that COVID call, right? So how do you suggest that families of first responders kind of mitigate the honey-do list when their first responder is coming home from work?
I love the question. And it may seem like an odd response, but I'm going to say first and foremost, look at the honey-do list with gratitude, and perhaps even give gratitude. Something like, honey, thank you so much for the to-do list. I love your ideas. I've had a long shift tonight, and before I start, I'm going to have a few-hour nap. And after that, I'm going to get up and have lunch and spend some time with you and the kids. And then I think first I'll tackle this thing unless one of the others is more important to you. And so first I've started with gratitude, which puts me in a positive mindset. but I've also set a boundary which prioritizes my own wellness and recognizes I need some sleep. That was a long shift, and that's my first priority. And then I need to make sure I'm well nourished, and I need to connect with my family and support system. And I've established that that's really my priority. And then I'm going to compromise, and I'm going to work on the honey-do list. And so if you can go into the home after a shift almost with the expectation that there'll be an organized list, and approach it that way with what your partner's expectations are, because it's also tough to have a partner where you don't know what the expectations are, and to really focus on setting your boundaries for your wellness and feel good about that's what makes you the best partner, is prioritizing your health and wellness.
Awesome advice. Thank you very much. The next question is, you discussed not some nonverbal clues. So what are some nonverbal clues that might tip us off to conflict in the verbal message?
So think about anything that when we're fighting, our face gets red, our fist gets clenched. But more even than conflict, close off would be my body turning away from you, my arms crossed over my chest. My toes are my greatest truth tellers, and so my toes pointing away from you is me looking to escape. And my comfortable body language is my arms open at my side, my feet open and facing you. Anything that involves me exposing where my inner organs are, my throat to my genitals, the inner area where all of my organs are. When you expose them to another human being, you are at your most vulnerable from a nonverbal perspective. And we read that on an innate level and recognize that. And anything that to guard those areas, whether it's covering our throat, crossing our arms, turning away, signal that closed off type of situation. Also, in terms of disrespect, rolling our eyes, not making eye contact are poor communicators, and making eye contact is an excellent way to have positive communication.
Thank you very much. The next question is, this is like a never-ending waiting period. It kind of equates to like a hurricane where you're sitting and watching the cone of concern, and it's coming, but it's not quite here yet, and you're in this holding pattern of high stress. How do you navigate life being on hold, like school and travel and all these things that we're used to doing? How do you recommend kind of navigating that?
I think that's a great question. And this actually came up with a client today who was really struggling. And we talked about, first of all, not thinking of it in extreme terms. So I like life on hold as opposed to thoughts like, we're never going to be able to see each other again, or it's never going to get back to normal. And I think planning into the future. So looking at what's reasonable and making some concrete and some flexible plans towards the future, looking ahead towards travel, thinking outside the box and planning some of those things that you still love and finding ways to incorporate them. I think learning is something, I mentioned the science of well-being. Learning is something that we can do and that exercises our brains. And so finding new things that excite us that we can learn about, whether that's cooking or cars or crafting, things that allow us to have an outlet and find new things to do. So looking around for repurposing things, and again, fun things like games and getting outdoors and going out into nature to keep your brain fresh and engaged in life.
That's one.
Animals are another way
Yeah.
to kind of keep it fresh.
Yeah, I've been asking for a puppy for my birthday, so we'll see if that's going to help out.
They're hard to find.
Yes, well, certainly your advice will provides leverage to my request. So thank you for that on many levels. My next question to you is this. There are a few of us, for example, chief officers or people who are higher leveled, or individuals who act as public information officers, who are required to watch the media, and limiting time in front of news coverage is really not something that is feasible. So how do you kind of cope with that kind of stress in the household and take some of the steps that you were recommending, despite the fact that the news has to kind of not constantly be on, but it's got to be on in the household?
Sure. So to the extent you can, I'd read it over watch it. To the extent you can, I'd put it on mute so that you're just reading the relevant things and unmuting what you think, most of it is not necessary listening, and it is highly repetitive. So I think that in terms of actual news, you can get most of it in print format, in a more useful way. So when you can go that way, do that. And then I definitely would take breaks on it. If you believe it needs to be on in the house, I would have times where it is off, entirely, the TV off, not just the volume off, but the TV entirely off. So and set parameters around the timeline. So maybe there's certain times when news gets updated, and you focus on your news at those times, and then shutting it off and not getting dragged in. It's kind of like Facebook, Twitter, or TikTok. Like if you get on them, it's very hard to find your way off of them, and you just end up watching a bunch of bullshit and not really getting the limited stuff that you need.
That is great advice. Thank you so much. We've all found ourselves as first responders, increasingly exposed to COVID. As a matter of fact, I just got an alert on my phone that Florida's setting all kinds of records here for COVID. And we're literally first responders on the front line of these crises. We know that we're called out for all kinds of, sometimes we are just the first and only medical response that our community can be in touch with. So what are your recommendations on how to communicate with what are your recommendations on how to communicate our increased exposure to our partners, families, caregivers, whatnot, and their respective exposure to us?
Again, I'd focus on communicating what you can control and can't control. And so I am sure that it has an increased household distress as you're exposed more and you're coming home, and that does have an impact to your family. And I would say be real with your family about your exposures. If you feel like your exposure was so great that you should be separating from your family, I'd explain that. And that's so individualized depending on who is in your household and what are the right steps for everybody there. But I think the most important part of that, again, is just honest communication, not and drilling us down on what can we control. Like, we can't control the other people, but we can control if we're getting a good night's sleep. We can control if we're going to nourish our bodies. We can control if we're going to reach out and be loving supports to one another. And if we're doing those things, we will be more resilient and able to fight any illness that we do come across. And so that across the board are going to be the wellness strategies that we all have to take. And in doing so, that's really what we can control.
That's great advice, to be able to focus on the things that we can control instead of the external things that are just beyond our capabilities. So that said, I'm wondering, as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, I've been in quarantine for 2 weeks. I'm going on another 2 weeks. I'm certainly making the best of what I can at home, but how do you suggest somebody who's in quarantine? I guess my first question is, how do you suggest for those that are in quarantine and not too ill, how do you think they can maximize their time that self-time while in quarantine?
I think actually just starting with creating a list for yourself of projects that you have put off, things you wish you would do if you had time, and some things that you feel are like chore things, some things that are fun things, and putting them down on paper and brainstorming ideas. Because once you get ideas, then you can pick a project and work it to completion. But sort of when you have like, okay, I have a month to do, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And then you fill it up with a bunch of little things, you'll get through the end of the 30 days and you may not feel like you really accomplished anything. Versus here you are at the beginning of another 2-week quarantine, you have 2 weeks ahead of you. What are some things that if at the end of 2 weeks you would feel this was a successful use of your time, if you got that under the bathroom cabinet sink cleared out, if you taught Maddie a special trick, if you could run a 5K a minute faster than before. So I think just setting some tangible goals for yourself and chipping away at them, or a project for yourself, helps make it meaningful and helps you stay motivated. But really having a goal and a plan.
Awesome. And for those of you that don't know, Maddie is my squishy little squish 6-year-old that who I love and adore. And that's wonderful advice. Thank you so much. And my follow-up question to that is, if we're in quarantine, what is the most effective way to ensure that we have positive and effective communications, both with our partners or adult loved ones, as well as our children?
I think it's, first of all, again, staying with your basics of being well rested, and it depends on your level of wellness in those times. But having a family plan for your communication, again, the person who's in quarantine doesn't get to go very many places. So part of that might be communicating about what you would expect and like from your adult cohabitators during this time, and how they can help you manage the quarantine and how you can help them. Maybe planning a series you'd like to watch with your partner, or a something you'd like to do with your child. But again, creating those plans that include families. So part of staying motivated is creating your individual things, but then you have your partner time and your family time, and so creating similar plans and goals to accomplish with the family. Maybe while we're home together, we're going to learn a TikTok dance, or we're going to plant an organic garden, and ensuring that you follow through on it. But if you talk about it and everybody's on the same page, you're more likely to all pitch in and be compliant with it. And then it's reinforcing. People, you all feel more connected and want to keep doing those types of things. And that builds, yes, I love it, Brianna, fondue night. That is fun. Or s'mores around the campfire. But fun things like a night of family twister, that's another one. Or partner twister, that's a different version. But have fun.
Awesome. What about supporting our spouses in the household? For example, if they come down with COVID, right? Because it's super stressful. So now our spouses are come down with COVID, and we're responders ourselves, and sometimes we mix those lines of loved ones and people that we respond to. So, what is the best way to show love, care, and concern, and positive communication, perhaps to our loved ones that may be infected with COVID?
So I think that's a great question, and it is hard to step out of your clinical mode and into your partner, mother, daughter, sister mode. And the number one thing I think is ask them what their needs are. So when people are sick, ask them what their needs are. Provide them with plenty of fluids, whether they think that's their needs or not. Push fluids on them like a maniac. Make sure they're rested. And monitor them, but most importantly, ask them what they need to get support right now. And if you've been with that adult person or child person long enough, some of the times we can read their nonverbals. And so reading what some of their needs are too. But number one, I think, is asking, and then trying to respect what they say, unless it's not having enough fluids, and then don't respect it and push fluids on them. That's my advice as a non-medical provider.
Michelle, I have a question.
Go for it.
Thank you so much. This is a great call. It's important because you know, we may be first responders 24 hours or during our weekday, but we have those family members at home, and obviously there's a great concern. Today we were doing some videos in our department, and I got to looking at the images, and all this, we were actually picking an image to put into one of our messaging videos for our department. And all of a sudden, the guy that I was working with, actually from the video group, was we both sat there in just shock and saw a group on a boardwalk with not a single mask in place. And we were actually taken by that. And I said, look at that. That looks weird. How incredible that our society has changed from what seemed to be the norm. And now to see a group without mask on, where all of a sudden we have this almost innate or emotional response to it. That being said, I think there's a heavy weight on just about everybody when you look at this as the new norm, and you're looking at this almost in a dismal way. I think I guess my question would be is, what advice would you have for us as we're talking to our families and especially our children, that this too shall pass? And of course, being optimistic, how would you propose that messaging get distilled to the family?
I like that, and I am a this too shall pass type of mentality, and I think working to embrace as much of that kind of new norm as you can that promotes health. And so back to those focusing on what we can controls, a mask is one of those things that we can control. And so when you're sharing with the family, like, you know, looking at it as, hey, at least this keeps us being able to socialize the way we like to, or I'm glad we're able to go out in public with it, gives us that spin of gratitude on what we still do have. And so framing it in that direction as, and also that this won't be forever. This is, you know, this right now helps us in this place, and this is what we need to do to get back to where it was previously, is allows just a bright side look on it. And so keeping that mindset really is so important. When people start viewing it as the barrier and a dismal sort of new normal, it's a very heavy mindset about it, and it has that eternity sort of feeling to it. And even the new normal, when we talk about it that way, it seems like we're talking about forever, right? And that we're not just talking about right now. And this is right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have just a couple more questions here. What are the biggest warning signs of stress in our teenagers that we should really be mindful of, right? We know that we need to give age-appropriate messaging to our young kids. And we've learned on previous calls that, you know, limiting that news time is important, but our teenagers are in those weird, awkward phases. And so what are some of those warning signs and stress of teenagers that we should be most vigilant for, please?
Okay. People are allowing their teenagers to keep ridiculous sleep schedules, and it is a terrible warning sign of stress. So kids and teenagers should be asleep by midnight, really 11 o'clock. But I am hearing from my client kids, they're up all night long. Excessive use of the electronics is a warning sign, because we know in teenagers it upticks their depression and anxiety. It does have a bad effect on their mental health. But serious warning signs are apathy and not caring, and withdrawing from all of their social contact, not being interested, that's when I would be seriously concerned. Any teenagers that are using substances, alcohol, breaking rules, sneaking out, also cause for concern. But those same warning signs of distress, what we're hearing teenagers verbalize is irritability, frustration, boredom. And I think that addressing the early warning signs, we're better off than coming to the late warning signs. And those early warning signs are changes in their eating, changes in their routine, even changes in grades, although right now that's sort of been normal and there's not school in this immediate moment. Checking out of school, those are our distressed teens, and they hear the news, the kids hear the news that's on TV, and society, including our children, are at a higher level of stress lately.
Wonderful, wonderful advice. I have some requests. If you could please post that mindfulness, I think it was a video class that you were referring to.
Yes, the science of well-being from Yale. I will.
I really appreciate that. I'm very happy to set up to send a follow-up email with that link. If you get it,
I'll send that in.
Are there any other resources, books or anything like that that you think would be advantageous to us during this time?
I love all types of mindfulness-based activities. I think yoga is a great mindful activity. Tai Chi is a great mindful activity. They really put you in touch with your body, with balance, and with your breath. And at our core, that's how we can settle down and be present. The apps that I mentioned, COVID Coach, Calm, Headspace, are all great apps out there too. But I definitely will send you the Science of Wellbeing. It is an amazing course. Thousands of people have taken it. It maintains a 4.9-star rating. And I just cannot recommend it highly enough. It will cover topics like resilience and grit and flow and focus on gratitude and some of the things that we talked about tonight as well. So I will send that to you in an email, Michelle, and you can send that out to everyone.
Thank you very much. Another thing that I've heard of from a couple of my friends is those adventure challenge books that they come in different areas, right? There's one that you can do with your partner, one you can do with your family, and there are all kinds of different fun ideas to do while we are in quarantine, and those are pretty exciting. With that, I'm going to thank you for being here. I am going to turn off the recording to see if there are more questions. We certainly appreciate your time and hope that everybody listening to this found the information advantageous. And we hope to have you back again in the future.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.